Before we begin, quick question. If masculinity were just about individual behavior, why does it keep looking so similar across politics, religions, workplaces, and intimate relationships? Why do quote-unquote good men still benefit from systems they claim to oppose? Why does power survive even when intentions change? Today we're talking about masculinity, not as personality, not as biology, but as a hierarchy. From hegemonic masculinity to the myth of the good guy. From colonial legacies to queer resistance. And from silence to accountability. If you've ever said, "not all men," or thought, "this doesn't apply to me," this episode might get a little uncomfortable. That's usually where the learning starts. I'm Aurora, and this is Intersectional Psychology. Stick around. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout South Africa and their connections to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people listening today. Masculinities, power, and the myths of the good guy. Hello and welcome back to Intersectional Psychology. I'm Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor, sometimes in the words of Sarah Ahmed, a feminist killjoy, and today, your tour guide through masculinity. Now, before anyone panics, this is not a men are trash episode, but it is an episode about power, gender, and why the line, "I'm one of the good guys," is not the mic drop that some men think it is. Today we're diving into hegemonic masculinity using the work of Raewyn Connell and James Messerschmidt, and grounding it firmly in the South African context through African feminist and decolonial scholarship, especially the work of Kopano Ratele. And fair warning, once you understand this framework, you will never unsee masculinity operating in boardrooms, churches, WhatsApp groups, initiation schools, or family braais ever again. So let's begin. What do we mean by masculinity? Masculinity is not a personal trait. It's not testosterone. And it's definitely not biologically pre-installed at birth, like some kind of cursed operating system. Masculinity is socially produced. It's shaped by history, culture, economics, race, colonialism, and very inconveniently, power. Cornell reminds us that masculinity isn't singular. There isn't one way to be a man. Instead, there are multiple masculinities arranged in a hierarchy. And at the top of that hierarchy, hegemonic masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity, the gold standard? Hegemonic masculinity is the culturally dominant ideal of manhood. Not the most common, not the most achievable, but the one that gets rewarded. Think authority, control, heterosexuality, emotional toughness, economic power, and the unspoken rule that real men don't ask for help. In South Africa, hegemonic masculinity is tightly linked to political leadership, economic provision, and patriarchal entitlement. And yes, we have very visible examples. Figures like Jacob Zuma didn't invent patriarchy, but they certainly perform it enthusiastically. As Pumla Gaqola points out, misogyny doesn't need to whisper when it's already sitting on a throne. What's important here is this. Hegemonic masculinity changes across time and place, but it always protects male dominance. It's adaptable, like patriarchy with software updates. Complicit masculinity. The good guys? Now let's talk about the most socially awkward masculinity to critique. Complicit masculinity. These are men who don't fully embody hegemonic masculinity, but still benefit from the patriarchal system that simply defaults to them. They're not violent, they're not loud. They're often very nice. They believe in gender equality, in theory. They'll say things like, I support women. I'd never do that. Not all men. And Connell and Messerschmitt would say, that's exactly the point. Because complicit masculinity doesn't challenge patriarchy. It coasts on it. In South African workplaces and religious organizations, this shows up when men support equity policies but don't challenge pay gaps, don't interrupt sexist jokes, don't question who gets promoted or who holds leadership positions. It's the masculinity of silence, not resistance. And as African feminists remind us, silence is not neutral. Marginalised masculinity, power without privilege. Marginalised masculinity refers to men who cannot fully access hegemonic masculinity because of race, class, or structural exclusion. In post-apartheid South Africa, this is especially relevant for men of color who were and still are economically and politically disenfranchised. Here's the tension. Denied power by race and class, but still granted power over women and queer people. Ratele reminds us that colonialism didn't just steal land. It restructured gender. When economic power is stripped away, masculinity often gets reasserted elsewhere through violence, hypermasculinity, control over bodies and space. The systematic economic exclusion of men of color has led to the development of other forms of masculinity, such as street entrepreneurship and gang membership. These are responses to dispossession. Understanding this does not excuse harm, but it does explain it. And explanation is necessary if transformation is the goal. Subordinate masculinity, policed and punished. Subordinate masculinities are those that are actively devalued and punished by the gender hierarchy. This includes queer men, gender non-compliant men, men who reject dominance and aggression. In South Africa, the violence faced by queer men is not accidental. It's disciplinary. In their analysis of the Xhosa language film Inxeba, The Wound, Kiguwa and Siswana in 2018 show how Xhosa men hide and punish same-sex desire. This subordination of non-heteronormative masculinities illustrates how same-sex desire is both present and violently suppressed within traditional masculine spaces. As scholars like Sonicus remind us, the global queer imagination and colonial representations of homomasculinity usually excludes African queer identities, as if queerness needed a passport to exist. Subordinate masculinities reveal something crucial. Masculinity is not just rewarded, it's enforced. Ratele and the decolonial turn. Kopano Ratele asks us to slow down, to stop importing Western masculinity models and slapping them onto African contexts like a bad sticker. He argues that African masculinities must be understood through colonial histories, economic precarity, cultural rituals, and lived experience. Yes, provider masculinity exists here, even where jobs don't. Yes, initiation rites reinforce authority. but they also carry communal meanings. Ratele doesn't deny patriarchy, he complicates it. And that's the decolonial move, refusing both romanticization and reduction. Ratele's work is an invitation to decolonize the study of masculinities by emphasizing how masculinities are often reshaped in response to the socio-political transformations taking place in post-colonial Africa. Violence, gender, and accountability. Ratele is clear. Violence is not a side effect of masculinity. It's a training method. Boys are taught that dominance equals respect. Aggression equals strength. Emotional suppression equals manhood. So when movements like #MEnAreTrash emerge, they're not saying all men are evil. They're saying the system is killing us. They seek to challenge hegemonic masculinity by holding men accountable for rampant gender-based violence. And the defensive cry of #NotAllMen often reveals exactly what kind of masculinity is speaking. Because accountability feels like oppression when you're used to privilege. Alternative masculinities. Yes, they do exist. Here's the good news, because yes, there is some. Masculinity is changing. We see it in men who parent differently, men who reject violence, men involved in feminist and queer activism, men who value care over control. These are counter-hegemonic masculinities. They don't dominate. They don't need to. And crucially, they don't ask for applause for doing the bare minimum. They understand that masculinity is not something to defend, but something to reimagine. Cornell and Messerschmitt give us the map. Ratele gives us the compass. Masculinity is not fixed. It's not natural. And it is absolutely political. If we want gender justice in South Africa, we cannot only talk about women. We must talk about men, about power, about history, and about the masculinities we keep rewarding. Decolonizing masculinity is not about replacing one hierarchy with another. It's about dismantling the idea that domination is the price of belonging. And that work, it belongs to all of us. Before you go, if you've ever thought, I'm one of the good ones, the Patreon bonus for this episode goes where the main show can't. We talk about silence, about complicity without cruelty, about what counter-hegemonic masculinity looks like, and about why #NotAllMen isn't a defense, it's a detour. If you're ready to complicate the patriarchy, that conversation is waiting for you on Patreon. Once you start seeing masculinity as something structured rather than natural, another question becomes unavoidable. Where exactly is this structure operating? In the next episode, we'll bring masculinity and power firmly into context, looking at how patriarchy operates in South Africa, shaped by colonialism, apartheid, culture, religion, and inequality. That's next time in this series on intersectional psychology. Until then, remember, everyone has the right to live with their optimal mental health. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectionalpsychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectionalpsychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsych.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology, but mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Cite Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.